So thank you again for being with us. Thank you for everyone who sent an email or otherwise reached out and contacted me to see how I was doing after being sick last week. Everything's well. It was a very short-lived bug, and it's gone. And if you were looking at YouTube, you saw I actually got a chance to go tubing down the river with one of my grandsons yesterday. We didn't get very far as I didn't tighten the air valve, but we had fun with as far as we got. So everything is wonderful. Today I want to pick up where we left off a couple of weeks ago. And again, I need to set the stage one more time for the levels of consciousness. I know you hear this a lot, but it's very important that we come to understand the evolution of human consciousness from what would be the orthodox or the fundamental level through the Gnostic or the knowing level into the mystical level. And I think a lot of times if we look at some of the disagreements, if you will, between theologians and philosophers and even politicians of sorts, you find that people are just coming at the same issue sometimes from different levels. And they may be saying things that are correct when viewed from that level, but the other level of consciousness just can't even fathom it, can't even grasp it. In Plato's Republic, he tells us about the people who were raised in a cave, and they were chained in the cave in such a manner that they couldn't see the opening of the cave. They could only see the wall opposite the opening of the cave. And when the sun would come up in the morning, the sunlight would stream in, and it would create light and shadow on the wall of the cave. And as people walked past the mouth of the cave and drew their horse carts past the mouth of the cave, and animals wandered by, the people could only see the shadow on the wall. But because this was all that they ever knew, they thought that that was reality. They thought that that was the way it was. And one day, one of the people in the cave was able to get loose of the chains. And he walked outside. And the first thing that happened is he was blinded by the light. Blinded by the light. The mystical experience. Blinded by the light. And when he came back in the cave, he tried to tell the people who were still there that what they thought was real was not. That it was merely a projection, merely an image, and that outside the cave there was a totally different, a totally new reality that was more real than what they had been experiencing. And the people laughed at him and they thought he was crazy. They were certain that what they were seeing on the wall was real. And of course, that never happened. That is a teaching story. But what it means to us is that we are all living a life where we believe that what we see and our interpretation of what we see is reality. And it is not. It is not. There is, in fact, a whole different world, a whole different way of seeing, a whole different way of knowing. There is a whole different kingdom, to put it in biblical terms. And we have been told this over the years. We have been told this by different teachers at different times. You know, in New Testament we're told, judge not by appearances, but judge by the righteous judgment. You know, Jesus told his disciples, don't take any worry for the things that you see in the world. Remember we talked a couple weeks ago, take no thought. But seek first the kingdom. Seek first that other way of perceiving, that other way of knowing. Seek first that reality that has been hidden from us, that has been behind us, but we haven't seen. So teachers have always been telling us this. Judge not by appearances. Everything is not as you think it is. And yet, in our experience, in our way of the world, we cannot break ourselves loose of those chains. We are so tied to them. We say, well, yes, I understand that. I understand that everything's spiritual. I understand that everything is a projection of consciousness. But, see, and right there is where we're saying, but I don't believe it. I don't completely believe it. So what we've been talking about the last couple of weeks is moving away from that first level of thinking, which is all about doing. It is all about fear. It is all about the power is out there, and somehow we have to adjust our behavior in order to appease the power so that the power will give to us whatever it is that we want at the time. And you know, as children, you can see that as little children growing up, we have to do that to get what we want or need from our parents, right? A baby has to learn how to get its mother to feed it when it's hungry, how to get someone to change it when it needs to be changed. Right? We have to figure out how to manipulate that power out there, how to get its attention, how to get it to do for us what we want it to do. Then we move into what I refer to as the knowing level, the thinking level. We start to realize that, well, wait a second, you know, maybe I just don't have to manipulate the power out there. Maybe I don't have to modify my behavior to appease the power out there, but maybe there's something that I can do myself. Maybe there's a part that I play. This is when we start to move into an understanding that the life that I experience, what goes on out in my life, is a reflection of my inner beliefs. It's a reflection of my consciousness. In fact, it is done unto me according to my belief. And my interest then becomes not so much kind of manipulating the circumstances out there in the world in order to get what I want, but my interest then becomes manipulating or changing my own beliefs. So that once I change my own beliefs, the experience that I have in the world begins to change, becomes a reflection of my changed belief. And we study and we learn and we grow and we learn techniques for affirmative prayer, whereas in the first level our prayer might have been a begging, a beseeching, a pleading prayer of that power out there, that God that we envision out there to do something to us or for us. We move into a different mode of prayer, which is a prayer that is designed to change our own consciousness and to set in motion a power that will continue to change our consciousness for us. We call it treatment. Other people call it affirmative prayer. But what tends to happen to us as we move into that mode of consciousness, and again, I want to say there's nothing wrong with any of these levels of consciousness. There's an evolution from one to the next to the next. There's an evolution of them. And they are necessary. We have to learn certain things at each level along the way. So what tends to happen is that when we were at the first level, we were trying to manipulate something out there so that we could get what we wanted, whether it be health or wealth or love, better jobs, fancy cars, whatever it might be. Punish our enemies a lot of times, right? Getting God to smooch somebody for us. But when we move into level 2, now we're trying to work with our own consciousness. But we're still trying to use our spiritual nature, the fact, and by spiritual nature, the fact that we can choose. We have will and volition. We can choose. We can decide. We can decide what we want to believe. We can decide that which we would have. And we can, because we are in spirit in nature, that same power that acted when God said, "Let there be," creating the universe, that same power responds to us so that it is in fact done unto us according to our belief. So now what we're doing frequently when we step into this level is we are trying to use our new understanding of our own spiritual nature and of the spiritual powers in the universe, the spiritual thought force, sometimes Ernest Holmes would call it. But we're trying to use that in order to have a better human existence. That we're still trying to have better health, we're still trying to have more wealth, we're still trying to have fulfilling and loving relationships. Fulfilling and satisfying work becomes a very, very important aspect of our lives at this level of maturity. We no longer want to work just to make a buck. We want to work because it fulfills our soul. We want to work because we feel like we're part of something so much bigger. You know, we want to find that spot where we would get up and go to work every day, even if they never paid us. You know, just how wonderful it is to be there. How wonderful it is to be of service. How wonderful it is to give our gifts in that way. But what we're still doing is we are still thinking in terms of duality. Sometimes at that level, we are still thinking in terms of duality. We are thinking that there is the material world in which we live, and there is the spiritual world from which we come, and they intersect right where we are. They come together right where we are. And what we are trying to do is we are trying to use our spiritual nature to have a better human experience. We're trying to fix ourselves, we're trying to fix the world. And because we are stuck in this idea of duality, you know, there's God and then there's the world. Because we are stuck in that idea of duality, there is always this constant battle going on within us, within our own experience, of which is going to win. Our belief in spiritual nature or our belief in materialism. It's like we're going down the river and we've got 1 foot each in a different canoe. So we're standing in 2 different canoes and we're heading down the river. Excuse me. The one canoe, of course, is materialism. The world is a material system. Chemicals got together and created life. Or we have 1 foot in the spiritual canoe. The universe is a spiritual system. It was created by the power of the divine stating its intention, its declaration to make it so, and then that declaration acted upon by something called the doer of the word, call it the law of mind, call it the Holy Spirit in traditional theology, but something acted upon that. And because we are created in that image and likeness, that same power responds to us according to our beliefs. So that's what I mean by starting out down the river with 1 foot in each canoe. And that works for us for only a little while. You see, we can only keep our balance if the water is smooth. But if we're heading down the river and we're starting to get into little rapids where the water is kind of churning up and it's pretty active, and maybe there's rocks sticking up out of the river and we're going to have to maneuver around those rocks, well, we can't do it as long as we've got 1 foot in each canoe. We're going to have to make up our mind. We're going to have to get into one or the other, but we can't remain split into both. And usually what we do is we get back into the materialistic canoe. We get back into the human canoe. We try to go back and do whatever it is, whatever trouble we're facing, we try to solve it in whatever way worked for us in the past. You know? So if we're out of work, we immediately, in our minds, we go back to, well, what did I do the last time I needed a job? If we're not well, what did I do the last time I felt like this in order to get well? We're trying to go back to the old way. And it's when we start to continue to grow, to continue to grow in our spiritual experience, that we become more willing, more able to get into the spiritual canoe, to leave the human canoe behind. And this is the point where we leave level 2 and we go into level 3, which is that mystical level. The mystical level where it says spirit is all there is. Those are things that we look at that appear to be material are in fact spiritual things appearing as material. That is, the material things are not real. The material things are the shadows on the wall of the cave. The material things do not have the power to create themselves. They do not have the power to perpetuate themselves. They are merely projections of the divine consciousness that has created them. We get little glimpses of this. We start to, as we do our spiritual practice, as we do our treatment, as we do our meditation, as we do our study, we do our reading, as we do our visualization, as we do all of the things, we use all of the tools in our metaphysical toolbox, what happens is we start to have little glimpses outside the cave of materialism. We start to have little glimpses of the spiritual kingdom as it is perfect, as it is whole, as it is complete. And that's moving into the third realm. The third realm. So we get glimpses of the third realm from time to time, and we start to know that is our true home, that is our true experience, that is our real nature, that is the reality of the universe. And that which we have been calling the reality is not. It is not the reality. It is the appearances. And then we are ready to begin in earnest. Then we are ready to commit ourselves more deeply than we have ever committed ourselves before to abandoning all of the ideas that we have had. Excuse me while I get a drink of water. All of the ideas that we have accepted to be true, and all of the ideas that perhaps there's still part of us that wants it to work that way. We all want to be smart, and we want to figure out how to do things. We want to be powerful, and we want to win, and all of the things that the ego and the intellect really, really enjoy. We have to be willing to let those go. We have to be willing to recognize that none of that is the ultimate reality. That as far as we know, the ultimate reality is our spiritual nature. And it doesn't mean that what we see in the material world doesn't exist. That's not it at all. What it means is that what we see in the material world is purely a projection of consciousness. And what we see in the world of politics, and what we see in the world of finance, and what we see in the world of entertainment, and all of these things that we grow up with every day, what we live with every day, are projections of the consciousness of the people who created that system, those systems, and a projection of the consciousness of the people who participate in those systems. If you think about, for a moment, if you think about entertainment, the movies that get made are the movies that the producers believe people will watch. So in that regard, you can say that it is the movie-going public, the people who will pay to go see the movies. They are, in a sense, determining what kind of movies get made. So you can see that it's a reflection of consciousness. We hear this all the time. Why is this junk on TV? Why are movies so terrible today? People complain all the time. Well, they're that way because people will pay to go see them. If people didn't pay to go see them, well, they just wouldn't make them. Now you flip that concept over to what we call news. The news that we get, whether it be in a newspaper or whether it be on television or whether it be on the radio. If you look at all of those mediums, they make their money by creating an audience for their sponsors or creating an audience that is willing to subscribe to their services, to pay. And in either case, they have to deliver the news that people will watch, that people will pay to see. So they're giving people back as news what people want to see as news, not necessarily what really happened, not necessarily everything that happened, not necessarily the most important things that happened, but the things that people will watch and will see. So we see then that what we get in the news is not complete reality. What we get in the news is a filtered view of what's going on in the world. The same in politics. The people who get elected, the people who run for office are the ones that people will elect. The people who get elected kind of reflect, if you will, the consciousness of those who went out and voted. So we start to just step back a little bit and we can see how those things that are going on in the world, the wars that are going on in the world, the movement of money through the financial markets, you know, a lot of talk about money moving from the bottom up to the top 1% and the top 1/10 of 1%, and all of those things, what they are is they are reflections of human consciousness. That's all they are. They are reflections of human consciousness. They are not reality. When the consciousness changes, those things change as well. So Joel Goldsmith, in his work, The Infinite Way, he's talking about these things, and he says, you know, there comes a time when we look out at the world and we think, my God, it's hopeless. It is just absolutely hopeless. Human beings are so greedy, and they're so selfish, and they're so mean to one another. They're so caught up in their own little world that they never think about the other person and the way that their actions and their behavior affects the other person. That the power just seems to keep getting concentrated. And Goldsmith wrote this in the 60s. He didn't know anything about what was going on in the world today. But the power seems to get concentrated in a few, and the politicians who get elected are self-serving politicians rather than politicians who are serving the public interest, and everybody seems to be figuring out what's in it for me and how can I get more. And Goldsmith says that there comes a time where we just have to turn our back to that. Think of the people in the cave standing up and all turning around at once, so that all of the projections on the wall of the cave that they once thought were reality and true, and they had to interact with them, and they had to struggle with them, and they had to fight against them, they are nothing pretending to be something. And the only interest is getting completely in the spiritual canoe. And what Joel is telling us is that there's a time when we want to go out and we want to fight the human consciousness at the same level that it exists. And as Einstein tells us, you can't do that. It takes a different level of consciousness to solve the problem than the one that created it. So you see this in the human experience where people justify their own actions of violence in going out to combat those things that they have designated as evil, those things that they have designated as wrong. In our political system, you see zealots arise on each side of the argument, and some on more than two sides of the argument. And everybody justifies their actions of doing whatever they need to do to win, because if they can't win, they can't govern, they can't change anything. So we have debates where people talk, but they don't say anything. They just read from talking points, because they know that they've got to do that to prevail. So what we're saying then is, there comes a time when we realize the futility of trying to fight fire with fire, of trying to exist in the world of appearances, and trying to beat it over the head with a stick to get it to change, to wake up. And we realize that each and every person must awaken at their own time and in their own way. And what Goldsmith tells us is, we get a glimpse that no matter how crazy it looks out there, it's all okay. It's all okay because the presence of God is really there in the midst of the chaos. It's all okay because human beings are experiencing the consequences of their beliefs, and it is through the experience of the consequences of their beliefs, both good consequences and not so good consequences, that they begin to realize that it is their consciousness that is creating what they perceive to be their reality, and it is then that they begin on the path to awakening. And we can't force that in another. In fact, he tells us that one of the biggest dangers that we have is that when we get a glimpse of the goodness of God, when we get a glimpse of the idea that God really knows what it's doing, that suddenly we want to run out and save our friends and our neighbors, and we want to convert them, and we want to drag them kicking and screaming to understanding that God is all that there is. And what Joel tells us is we can't do that. We can't do that. When we do that, we're not functioning at a level other than the level of the problem. So what we must do, or what happens to us as we move along then, is we use our spiritual practice, and we do our treatment, and we do begin to have changes in our life. We do begin to have changes in our circumstances, but we start to realize that the only reason that we have had the change in our circumstances is because somewhere along the way, somehow, whatever we were doing, somehow we made contact with that level of consciousness outside the cave. Somehow we have had the glimpse and the experience of the presence of God. Somehow the divine grace, if you want to call it that, has entered our consciousness and has made a change. And because of that change, everything in our circumstances changed. And when that starts to happen, then what we want to do is we want to just have that experience of God. We recognize that trying to use our spiritual nature to improve our human life is just a waste of time. That realizing our true nature, that realizing our spiritual nature, by living fully in our spiritual nature, that is the purpose. That is the reason. So at that point, we cross over into that third level. At that point, we start to dissolve this idea of I, the ego I. At that point, we start to stop believing the intellect, because we realize that the intellect is in fact limited. At level one, a lot of ego involved in level one. Level one is maybe the brute force level. Level one is you're either going to be the victim or the victor, and it's always better to be the victor, and I'm going to figure out what I need to do to win, and I'm going to do it. Level one is about winning, prevailing. But the victor-victim consciousness is just two sides of the same coin, right? It's just two sides of the same consciousness. Some days you're up, some days you're down. We move into level two, and the intellect starts to take over, and the intellect says, well, I can figure out how this works. I can think about how this works. I can analyze how this works, and I can use my ability to think and to choose in order to work this all out for my, for my benefit. And again, there's nothing wrong with that, because what we're doing is we are learning, we are growing. But at some point, we get tired of that. At some point, we recognize that that too is not the ultimate reality, but it was only a step that we had to take along the way. And then we step into the idea that this thing that I called me, this thing that I called I, was only an idea. It is only an idea. That the true me, the true I, is something yet to discover. And as I think about it, and as I meditate on it, and as I go into my spiritual practice, more and more this idea of I becomes less and less and less. So Goldsmith tells us that we may have an idea that we need to express the qualities of God, because the qualities of God are our true nature. Peace, power, joy, love, all those things that we talk about. But this idea that we need to express them is a limiting idea. If we can take a deep breath and step back and let the ego just kind of chill for a minute, we can recognize that God already knows how to express itself. God already knows how to be God. God already knows how to be joy, and to be peace, and to be love, because that is its very nature. And we don't have to try to express those things. We need to get we out of the way, so that God expresses those things as us and through us. And it is in developing that confidence, that complete trust, that that power that has created the universe out of itself not only knows how to do, but is in fact doing whatever it needs must be to care for itself as us, that we can get out of the way. See, sometimes we like to say that the divine mind knows what to do, and the divine mind is doing it perfectly as me, but I need to get in there, and I need this, I need that, I need the other thing. And it is in that letting go of knowing that whatever the divine needs to do as me, it will move me to do it. The inevitableness of God that Emma Curtis Hopkins talks about. Goldsmith gives the example in his book of teaching. And he said he never went anywhere to teach, never ran an ad to teach, never advertised himself as a teacher. But when people came to him and said, I think you have something that I would like to know, then he taught them. If a letter came in the mail inviting him to come and speak and to give classes in a distant city, he went. But not until invited, not until moved, not until put into play. Our true nature is as spirit. Our true nature is that which we call our soul is an individualized expression of God. We didn't create ourselves, we wouldn't know how to do it. We didn't create our bodies, we wouldn't know how to do it. The infinite intelligence that is all that there is expressing itself as all of its creation, and that includes us. Can we let it? Can we let it be free to do so without ego and intellect trying to manipulate it? One of the best ways to do this is through the practice of becoming a witness, becoming an observer of all life, an observer of our own life. By feeling the gratitude, by feeling the awe, by feeling the wonder, watch the children if you have children or grandchildren, or go to a playground, or go somewhere where you can see the children and watch how they observe with awe and with wonder the things that you and I take for granted. We're in a drought right now in South Carolina, and as I look out the window, I can see the leaves on the trees. And I don't know why, but when the trees need water and when it's going to rain, they turn over. I haven't figured it out why, but they do. When we lived in Hickory, we had grapevines on our property. And if you've ever raised grapevines, every once in a while you have to go out and prune them, and you have to tie them up to the lattice work to get them to kind of train along the trellis. And in the process of doing that, inevitably, you would get some leaves twisted around upside down from the way they had been. And of course, the leaves are different colors on either side, so you can tell. But within a day, all the leaves had turned and had righted themselves. And there was an intelligence operating within them that knew exactly what they needed to do to receive their good. The sunlight, exactly. They didn't have to think about it. They didn't have to make offerings in order to get it to be accomplished. It just happened. It just happened as them. Can we be in awe and in wonder at the magnificence that God is as all of its creation? Can we recognize that even the people that we would love to change most through our power of prayer, that they too are expressions of God? And that we don't have to try to change them. But what we can know for ourselves is that the love of God is right where they are, and it is doing whatever is appropriate as them. We can bless them. When we sit down to take a meal, the old tradition was that we thanked God for providing us with the food, which is not a bad one. But can we recognize that the food is the very activity of the divine mind? That it is the very presence of God taking the form of food as it takes the form of everything that has been created. That in this very act of eating, that what is happening is that the divine is providing for the divine in this meal. And that is the perfect communion. So can we go through our lives? Can we go through our days? Can we go through our years just being in awe of what God is doing? Can we come to trust that the divine knows what to do in all of nature, and since we are part of all of nature, it knows what to do in us, as us, and through us? Can we accept the fact that there was a time that it was appropriate for us to focus on behavior, that there was a time for us to focus on knowing, and now the time is for us to focus on being? Being the perfect, beautiful, spiritual being that is our true nature. From the East, we get the story about the four men who were blindfolded, and they were presented with an elephant for the first time in their lives. And one put his hands against the side of the elephant, and he said, "An elephant is like a great wall." And the other put his arms around the leg, and he hugged the leg of the elephant, and he says, "An elephant is like a tree trunk." And the other went back and he grabbed the elephant's tail, and he said, "No, you're wrong. The elephant is like a rope." And the last one grabbed the trunk, and he held the trunk of the elephant, and he says, "No, no." He says, "The elephant is like a mighty python." Now we understand that story as a teaching story. We understand that each one was entirely right from his own perspective, from the little piece that he had. By relating it to his past knowledge and experience, he was right. But none of them could see the bigger picture because they were blindfolded. None of them could see outside that cave we're talking about. None of them could see that other experience. And there's one other thing about that story that I realized this morning. None of them said, "Well, there may be more to the elephant, but the piece I have is like a wall or a tree or a snake or a rope." None of them was willing to admit or did admit that they didn't know the whole truth. They each assumed that their experience was the way that reality was and is. And they assumed that the others were having an erroneous experience. And what I am inviting you to do today, what I am asking you today, is to simply acknowledge that none of us has the big picture. None of us can see all that God sees. None of us has all of the answers. Each of us has been judging as reality our own experience, that little piece that we could take in. We related it to what we learned when we were growing up, and we said, "Aha, that's the way it is." So I invite you this week to say to yourself, that's not the way it is. I don't know the way it is. My intellect is not big enough or smart enough to ever know all of the way that it is. But there is that within that does know. There is that within that does reveal to me the true nature. The true nature of God as spirit. The true nature of God as me, as spirit. So I invite you this week to consider, are you willing to let go of the belief in duality? Are you willing to let go of the belief that there is God and there is matter? Are you willing to let go of the desire for a better human experience, and instead to allow your desire to only be for the experience of God? Rumi tells us that the moth will try to get to the flame of the candle, and if you put a glass over the candle, a hurricane glass, you put them over the candle to keep them from blowing out, that the moth will continue to beat its head against that glass. There's something in that moth that wants to be with that flame, and if you take the glass away from the candle, the moth will fly right into the flame, even though it is consumed. And Rumi tells us that it will fly into the flame for the bliss of the moment of becoming one with that flame. Our desire is to become one with the presence of the divine, to lose the I, to lose the ego, to lose the intellect, and to simply let the divine be the divine as us. So take some time, if you will, this day, this week, take some time to just sit and marvel and observe what God is doing, what God knows how to do, what God can do, and then realize that all of that applies to you. Each and every one is a special one in whom God is well pleased. Let's go forward in confidence that that is so, and so it is.